My name is Maylin too. I'm a freelance journalist here in LA. I cover transportation and infrastructure. And today we're talking about building a better tomorrow, creating cities that work for all. So there's a lot of challenges facing cities today, but hopefully today we can talk about some of the solutions to those challenges. To start, I'm going to have our panel introduce themselves. Can we start with you, Matt?
Hey, how's it going? I'm Matthew Bonner, Director of Interaction Design at Designworks. We're a full-service design agency owned by BMW, so pretty unique. Happy to be here talking to you guys. Thank you.
Hey, Tiya Gordon, co-founder of Itselectric. We are electric vehicle charging specifically built for cities. We have a unique form factor. We're the only detachable cable solution here in the US, and we're the only behind-the-meter solution globally, so we don't have to connect to utility to deploy chargers. So we're really excited about how we can help cities accelerate electric vehicle infrastructure.
Good afternoon, my name is Matt Daus, I'm from New York. I worked for city government for over 20 years. I was the longest serving taxi limousine commissioner. I escaped New York and I'm still alive. I have three hats that I wear now. I'm Transportation Technology Chair at the City University of New York. We do research and we have a US DOT Center and work in the region on the East Coast, New York, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. I'm also president of the International Association of Transport Regulators. We're proud collaborators with Herbivore, and we represent basically as a nonprofit. We educate all the taxi and TNC commissioners all over the country, including the California PUC, which I'm sure you'll be dealing with a lot. And last but not least, I'm a lawyer. I'm a transportation lawyer. We live and breathe nothing but representing anything that moves people or goods or anybody who does business with it in all areas of law. Our firm dates back to the 1800s. It's Wendell's Marks. I founded and chaired a transportation law practice. We represented Thomas Edison in defending the patent for the light bulb, and here we are today representing anything on the street, including micromobility. We do consulting and law for governments, and including out here. We did a lot of work for LA DOT, so it's good to be here, and thank you for giving me the time to. You can deduct that from my final. Too many hats.
Hi, I'm Laura Friedman, and I used to be from New York, and I am really happy to be here and looking forward to learning from this amazing panel. I'm the token politician on the panel. I used to be a council member and mayor of Glendale, depending on the traffic, somewhere between 15 and an hour's time away from here by car, 15 minutes by metro if you take the train. And I'm currently a state assembly member, and until recently I was chair of the Assembly Transportation Committee. And with any luck, hopefully next year I will represent the 30th Congressional District in Congress.
Hey everyone, a pleasure to be here today. My name is Sam Baker. I'm the managing partner of MobilityFund, a venture capital firm that's investing in early stage innovative mobility technology companies. And I'm looking forward to the conversation with you.
Yeah, to get started, Matt Daus, I thought we could start with you because you've worked across so many different curb modalities, including taxis, rideshare, and micromobility. What potential do you see in the curb, especially given the amount of competition?
That's a good question. I actually love this conference, Herbivore, like the term Herbivore. I think Jonah was the first curb whisperer. Tiya said, people of the curb. I have a new term that I'd like to coin, which will answer that question. It's called Curbtopia. And for any of you who were fortunate enough to read Sir Thomas More's Utopia in college, I'd like to say that, the main point I want to make about how you can have the best curb and the most ideal curb is to get people off the curb. I think we don't spend enough time talking about who should not be there, as opposed to who should be there and how we crowd people in and we fight for it. So maybe that's where the term Herbivore came from, we're eating each other up, right? I think the first thing we need to do is to get people who shouldn't be on the curb off the curb. That's the first principle of Curbtopia. We need to get people in central business districts who are parking on the street off the street. We need to get people into parking garages. One of my clients, Joko, started a ride share legally, in my opinion, in parking garages. to not clutter the streets. DOT sued them, and now they're a delivery company. Bottom line, gets buses, intercity buses off the curb like they do in San Francisco. They have all the municipal parking for, you know, the zip cars of the world. And I think there are 3 types of curbs. I think we don't talk enough about this, but not all curbs are created equal, and they're not the same. The first one is the densely populated curb. That's the one that you see maybe in LA and New York City and Manhattan, you know, where there's just too much going on. Then you have the, I would say the hub curb. You know, you go to the end of the line, and it's you know, first and last mile. You're going to a suburb. You're taking a train, and where do you go from there for that last mile? And third, we have the residential curb. So, in terms of answering that question, there are 3 ways to approach it. The most intense one is the dense curb. You know, I think you need to get automated enforcement, not just for people who shouldn't be there, but also for the bikes. And I know this might not be popular. We need to kind of police, you know, who's on that curb. And we should get we should get parking outside of Manhattan. We shouldn't have any type of parking anywhere in the central business district. There should be spaces where ride-hails and Ubers can pick up, and taxis. There should be a place where you can park the vehicles. It's something that can be configured, and it is being done in some aspects. The hub, my vision and my perspective is that we should be subsidizing. Public transit should be subsidizing deliveries and the last mile home by using the street when you get out of that train station and you got to go that last mile to have your choice of modes, whether it's a bus, a ride-hail. You can have the EV charges there, and last but not least, the residential is the easiest. But we should have, you know, the ability to park our cars there and charge them with, like, you know, places like entities like Itselectric, where you have a car, you have the EV on the street. So I think we need to think and get into the weeds on this issue, because, you know, the perfect curb needs to adapt to the environment around it. And if we start thinking that way, and maybe making some tough decisions, I think we can solve this problem. Because there's no one curb for everybody. You know, it's all about geography.
Yeah, Tiya, I know you work also in the curb space, more residential. Can you talk about EV charging and how like our neighborhoods reflect the ability of people to actually charge their vehicles?
Yeah. Hi. So I think Matt has put a whole bunch of ideas in my head, in that we don't live in a perfect world where we can just start carte blanche and build a utopian situation where everything is clearly organized in place. Cities are dynamic, they are historic, they are living organisms in a lot of ways, and you have to be able to work while living. You can't just put everything on pause and say, well, we're gonna hold off on this because we need to wait for the better opportunity that's 20 years in the future, because we're never gonna make any progress that we need, especially when we're talking about things around electrification and the climate crisis. You know, we're 1 year away from capping greenhouse gas emissions targets, which is not going to happen. So what are we going to do? So I think that we need to understand that we have to, as people that are working in transportation, in government, in design, need to understand what the challenge is, and then how do you solve it with the tools that you already have, while you're perhaps building that better machine for 20 years from now. So that's why Itselectric wanted to use the infrastructure that already exists, which is in what we consider the built environment. The built environment is our infrastructure. So, you know, curbs, buildings, that's already all there. So let's use what we have while we start to think about larger systems where we can kind of move things off the street, where we can make these sort of more smart cities. But in the meantime, we can still service the needs that we have immediately for our electrification goals, especially here in LA, where we're looking at 2028, 2030, 2035, and then ultimately 2050 for, you know, capping greenhouse gas.
Yeah, Matt, I'm wondering if you could talk about what you're working on with bus shelters. That's also something that has to share space with a lot of different things going on, whether it's pedestrians or anyone on the sidewalk. How does that work?
Yeah. So one of the interesting things we've been working with Transito and the city of LA on the street transit amenities program, which is building new shelters and replacing and refurbishing shelters throughout the city of LA. And one of the challenges is really making this like a living, dynamic thing that benefits the community. I think it's been a radical a radical shift in like the mindset of a bus shelter. Typically, a bus shelter is seen as something that's this physical object that's just kind of like static and doesn't ever change. I mean, even when we did the research, we went around the community, bus shelters and the bus lines I took like 15 years ago, still the same, right? Taking that static artifact and translating it into a modern piece of infrastructure that's dynamic and changes over time, right? So that we can take that, use that as like a base of operations to include things like EV charging, scooter docks, things like that that are meaningful for the community, provide last mile assistance, or even do things like integrate, like let's say e-lockers, so that people have more accessible access to like secure storage for deliveries and things like that. What's really interesting too is when you think about it from a like macro scale, when you have these dynamic shelters where we have e-ink and dynamic displays, you now have this like very flexible messaging system throughout the entire city of Los Angeles, right, and all the connecting networks. So you can, the city's empowered and the transit agencies are empowered to provide real-time data and updates to all the population. That same ability also allows you to work on a very micro scale as well. So you can target specific communities with, advertisements, but also community messaging, local groups, local ads for local small businesses and things like that, in addition to all the other services. So it's really interesting to see how creating this dynamic object has really started to really improve and has the potential to take off and really kind of change the sidewalk landscape around LA.
Switching gears a little bit, Assemblymember Friedman, I know you've worked on some legislation around making cities better. I wanted to ask you about AB 645 in particular and speed cameras and how you see that as making cities better.
So speeding vehicles is a contributing factor to the amount of injuries and deaths that a vehicle causes. And it's a graph that's exponential, that every mile an hour that a vehicle is going faster, it's an exponential increase in the risk of injury and death, to the point where at a certain point, a collision is not survivable. And it's really ironic because several years ago when cities across the state, including Los Angeles, made a push towards what we call Vision Zero, which is a safer environment for pedestrians and cyclists and people at bus stops and everything else, we saw instead a rapid increase in the amount of injuries and deaths. There's a lot of factors. I'm not a psychiatrist, but certainly we can all think about the reason why people are driving, or the reasons why people are driving faster and with more distractions. During COVID, when we saw that the only thing that was limiting speed was traffic congestion, we saw a very rapid increase in speeding vehicles and in commensurate deaths and injuries in California and across the country. So there's only so much. So I convened I did a bill successfully that created a Vision Zero task force of stakeholders from across the state, from rural areas, from urban areas, from law enforcement, from the walk bike groups, from transit agencies, from traffic engineers. We tried to get everyone together really for the first time, across the state. And that group met for over a year at the CTC, and did a very comprehensive analysis of Vision Zero programs around the country, of different laws, to see what worked and what didn't work. And out of that, there was a comprehensive list of recommendations. And I would love to tell you that the state and every local government adopted every single one of them to save lives, but of course they didn't. I've been working for 5 years, even before the Vision Zero task force, on automated speed enforcement to allow for cameras to ticket people who are egregiously speeding in our communities. There's a lot of data, including from New York City, that these cameras work, that people don't reoffend, that it slows the traffic down. But there were also a lot of concerns around privacy, around impacts on disadvantaged communities of color, on all manner of things, on speed traps. Everyone hated the red light camera program, so people were immediately like, don't do it. So we sat down for years, for the number of years, with the opponents and really worked with them Even with AAA, who's never supported automated anything, when it comes to enforcement. And in the end of 5 years, we created what people have said is the model for how to do automated speed enforcement in a way that's equitable, that's not punitive, that's about changing driver behavior and culture, that puts resources back into those very same communities, because any money that's taken in can only be used for traffic calming on those same streets. It can't go into a general fund. It can't even be used to backfill money in a previously planned traffic safety program. The tickets, the first ticket's a warning for everybody. It's like, it's all kinds of safeguards built into the legislation. You have to be going 11 miles over the speed limit. The tickets start at just $50. There's no points on anyone's license. There's no facial recognition technology. It's like a parking ticket where the ticket goes to the car, not to the driver. So if your 18-year-old is speeding, you're going to know about it as the owner of the vehicle. There's all kinds of stuff that in the end made those haters into supporters, and we got the bill passed and signed into law. And by the way, it's a 6-city pilot for a few years, and then we collect data, refine the program. There's all this reporting that has to be done about who gets the tickets and what happens to them and all that kind of stuff. So very proud of that, but this is part of work that I've been doing for the past number of years, since even before I was in the legislature. I've been there for 8 years, to de-silo issues that people think of in silos. And if you'll give me just a second to just unpack that a little. So I have found that people tend to think about issues like, I'm going to think about climate change, and I'm going to work on climate change. And I'm going to think about housing, and I'm going to work on housing. I'm going to think about traffic safety, and I'm going to work on traffic safety, without always an acknowledgement that those particular issues, along with things like public health and equity, are all linked, and that you actually can't tackle any one of those without trying to tackle all of them. So I have year after year introduced suites of legislation that try to deal with all of those issues. So we're never going to get people out of their cars if it's not safe to walk and ride my bike. Hence the traffic safety. Plus, I don't want people to be killed. And then, I really care a lot about housing, but I also care about transportation. So I worked for a couple of years and successfully banned parking minimums near transit, near high quality transit, which was really, really a heavy lift. And I still get, a lot of hatred directed to me for that. But how are we going to focus on creating housing if we're spending more of our resources creating parking for cars everywhere? And how are we going to get transit to work if everybody can just drive and park everywhere easily? So there's all kinds of ways these issues are connected, and they have to be dealt with kind of simultaneously, right? Like, we can't continue to build tons of parking and then also have transit work, but we also can't take away parking if we're not investing in transit. So at the same time, I tangled with the governor and got $1 billion with a B more for our transit budget 2 years ago in the state of California. So trying to say, like, okay, yeah, I'm going to take away maybe some parking for residences in some communities, but I'm putting more money into transit at the same time, because you've got to do it all at the same time as best you can.
Yeah, here in LA, voters recently passed Measure HLA. I feel like it shows that people do want safer streets, they do want alternatives to driving, and it was just so inspiring to see that people actually want that. Sam, I'm wondering if you could talk about funding just in the mobility space, because I know you work with startups. Are there any any patterns you're noticing with that, or with regulatory patterns?
Yeah, sure. Would it be okay if I ask a follow-up question? I'm just curious about, in terms of the cross impacts, if regulating speed then has a positive impact on congestion. I've seen some research around that, so less people speeding, particularly on freeways, means less congestion, lowering travel times. Did you guys experience that?
I have seen some research that people that speeders on highways can slow traffic down because they create a situation where people brake more, which causes waves of slowing. Like, if one person brakes, it actually causes this effect behind, and strangely enough, in front of the traffic. You sort of want everyone going the same speed. But we didn't encounter any pushback or any testimony in support of the speed regulation helping with flow of traffic. I would say that having to stop traffic because of dealing with an accident is certainly, what are the signal alerts caused by in Los Angeles? It's almost always a traffic accident. And speed is a contributing factor to a lot of our we try not to call them accidents now, are traffic violence in Los Angeles.
I say it's interesting because there's maybe a case to be made that by slowing people down, you can actually speed them up. Anyway, but you can take it. You can use that tagline if you want. That's my contribution. But yeah, so in terms of funding, I would say that we have some interesting anecdotal experiences we're seeing. Think about it from our perspective, right? I mean, we're a private investment fund that's funded by private individuals and private companies. And we're, at the end of the day, the main motivation that we have, even though we're personally passionate about the future of mobility impact, is we're measured based on our financial success, which is making money at the end of the day, right? And so I think that it's particularly interesting from a private sector perspective that the public sector is intervening, and I say that in a positive way, in two modes that we've experienced recently. One is that there are interesting subsidies that are being unlocked for positive behaviors in the mobility context, and I can share an example about that soon. And then the other is that the government, the public sector is intervening and creating incentives by essentially implementing rules that are having a positive impact on our investment strategy. And so again, rules on the one hand and then money on the other hand, right? It's a very simple thing to say, but let me give you some concrete examples in practice. One of the companies that we funded recently is providing software that is making it possible to take what were formerly closed EV charging networks that were proprietary, and some people call that walled gardens, and allowing them to open those systems up for broader public use and better interoperability between both the vehicles and then also other charging infrastructure. So what does that mean on a practical level? Well, you as an end consumer are not as constrained by which plug, so to speak, that you plug your car, your electric vehicle into, because the standards are the standards are open, right? Now, what's really interesting is that they have, in the last 6 months, have seen an incredible surge in demand for that particular solution because federal funding for EV charging is contingent on being an open system, right? You can't say, well, I'm taking money from the federal government, but at the same time, I'm keeping all of my technology proprietary. I'm not letting anybody else's vehicles plug into my charging infrastructure. So the regulation of that particular sector has been a huge positive impact on our portfolio because it's unlocked opportunities for innovative companies to come in and provide solutions to make that transition more seamless. On the other hand, another example from a recent portfolio investment in the area of autonomous driving. So think about last mile, think about vehicles in cities. This particular company is providing software and hardware to be able to convert public transportation vehicles into fully autonomous vehicles that can be driven in off-peak hours at much lower cost, etc. And in the world of autonomy now, there are very few players that have been able to demonstrate that this technology works at any meaningful scale. Think of the Waymos of the world as one example, or Cruise. And national governments have a strong incentive to ensure that there is ample competition in the space of autonomous driving, so that the market is not dominated by individual players, right? And so we're seeing now a surge in federal funding, not just from the US, but also European countries that are being directed at facilitating the growth of these businesses. Now, from a private sector perspective, this is really interesting because we're putting private dollars into these businesses, but then they're being supplemented by public subsidies, which are non-dilutive in nature. What does that mean? It means that they're getting essentially free money from governments to develop, doing research and development that would otherwise be funded by private investors. So we benefit as stakeholders in that business from the additional cash that's going in the business, and that government is not expecting to have that money paid back, and they're not expecting to have a share in the profits. Okay, we can debate whether that's a good use of public funds or not, and whether that's the right structure. But think about it from a private investor perspective. The business you just invest in is getting free money, and that individual or that entity or that government has no expectation of seeing that money back. So those would be two trends that we've seen that are positive from a private investor perspective, and is encouraging more private sector investment in these types of topics.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. It's something that came up in our pre-conversation too, was this idea of like who or what should be subsidized. So just opening up to the panel, like what do you think that the government should be subsidizing? You know, we have a limited amount of money and a lot of competition.
Well, I'll take a stab at jumping in on that. We're just about to get congestion pricing in New York City. So, okay, I'll take that. I'll reserve my clap for 1 year from now. We'll see how it works out. It's a bold move. A lot of cities, including I'm sure LA and others, are looking at doing the same thing. And I think, it seems clear that the debate as it transpired over the last year or two and the lawsuits that are still pending, and it's not a question of if, it's when. I mean, if even these lawsuits are successful, they're environmental lawsuits. So if they have to do an EIS, they'll be back in another year or two and they'll get it done. They have severe funding difficulties with public transit all around the country, but in particular in New York. And it's not even about congestion mitigation anymore. I think the big flaw there is that it's a money grab, and they're treating, Ubers and taxis and private vehicles and now trucks and so forth as if they're an ATM machine. And there's not talk about actually if it's going to work or not. And I don't think it's going to work the way it is now, honestly. It's going to give money to public transit, but no one ever talks about what happens once you're inside. To tackle congestion, you got to deal with construction, you got to deal with double parking and circling the block. It's a complicated equation. I think it'll help a little bit, but in terms of subsidies, and the ITR has, a report that we put out, all the regulators of TNCs and taxis. It's not a one-size-all-fit solution to tackle congestion, but when it comes to congestion pricing, what I would do, we collected $1 billion from Uber and Lyft and the taxis over the last couple of years. We've had congestion pricing. We've been paying charge after charge after charge from passengers to subsidize the competition. What I think we should do, and what the ITR has said, is we need to create a lockbox and subsidize the passengers who paid into using car services because it's not safe to take the train or they need to get to the doctor's office, whatever the reason. That money should be set aside to subsidize last mile, EV charging, zip cars, car sharing, scooters and bikes. That MTA should pay for. Because the person who's working the graveyard shift in the Rockaways or the far reaches of the Bronx or Staten Island at a hospital in Manhattan has to pay $40, $50 to take an Uber every day to go to and from that last mile. If we're looking seriously at mobility as a service, where we can seamlessly integrate the public and the private, the subsidies should go into a lockbox, and it should be, and that's one idea, but the curb should be subsidized in some way because no form of transportation is profitable except for luxury limousines and airlines. And that is an absolute fact. Everything else is subsidized because people cannot afford to pay what it takes to go to the airport. You want to pay a good wage to a limo driver? How much do they charge me? $350. If you give them the benefits and pensions and you want a nice car that's clean, this is the problem that we face, and I do believe that subsidies should play a major role. We should have EV charging stations there. There should be your choice of modes when you get out of that subway station, and it should be integrated with an app and paid for as part of your transit fare. You shouldn't have to pay a dime, or it should be a minimal fee to go that last mile. And I know people have been doing it. The FTA has done pilot programs all over the country. There wasn't enough money in the pilot programs for the big transit agencies like CTA or SFMT or MTA to interest them. It was a couple of $1 million. But Pinellas, Florida, all of these folks have been doing, wheelchair accessible service using cabs instead of the big vehicles. They've been using public subsidies to pay Uber and Lyft to take you the last mile. Let's do that at the curb, inside the district and also outside the district.
I can take a stab as well, going off of Sam's point. So, investors looking for innovation are looking for returns to bring that money back to the fund. And even though it may be in their hearts to also ensure equity, it's not necessarily part of their thesis and when they're coming out. So I think that there's a really strong world. So Itselectric, my company, we're a pre-seed stage company. We've raised equal amounts of dilutive and non-dilutive, right? And so what we do is we map that to make sure that we can raise non-dilutive to adjust not only EV charging for cities, but that's charging is in frontline communities. It's in J40 communities. And that's where the public funding can come in to make sure that innovation, capital I, that attracts investment, that attracts publicity, is ubiquitous and is not just limited to the sort of higher end areas, or unfortunately, according to a lot of articles, the majority white tract neighborhoods where they're seeing, 5 Teslas on every block. So there needs to be that balance where it's the private capital that can elevate the idea, but then it's the public capital that can disseminate it.
Yeah, I hear a lot about public-private partnerships and how that works out. I know with like bus shelters, for example, we pay for it with advertising. Like we don't pay for it with public dollars. I think that doesn't always seem to work out super well, unfortunately. But I wanted to get this question about just like who's being left behind, like who should we be subsidizing, like who in cities is being left behind amid all this like growth and development and new funding, and how do we include them?
So who's, sorry,
It just in cities, like we talk about drivers, we talk about pedestrians, we talk about bike riders, like in all these. I think there's actually like a new program actually to subsidize bike share that came out recently. But who's still being left behind in that?
Well, if it's okay, maybe I could just kind of go off of a statement that was just made here previously, and I wanted to pick up on one point you were mentioning about not thinking about things in one dimension, but that a lot of overlap and it's kind of complicated. I think that I don't have like a solution to say, okay, we just did this and everything will be fine. I do think though that it's interesting to observe models in other countries about how public transit is structured and how it's funded to imagine a different way that this can work. And I'll give one example. So it's not uncommon in certain markets in Asia. Japan is certainly like this. Singapore, Hong Kong. The public transit authorities are actually not primarily operators, like profitable operators of vehicles, like trains, etc. But they are more like property development companies, right?
I just can't believe you bring this up because I was going to talk about the same thing.
Go, you do, please.
What's happening?
This is like some sort of channeling here. So it's just an example, right? It's not a suggestion like, oh, we just do this in LA, everything will be fine, but it may be not appropriate here, but it's just a different approach, right? It's just to say, and I'm not an expert at it, but just to kind of put it in a nutshell, the MTR in Hong Kong is essentially developing shopping lifestyle locations, which happen to be metro stations, that they are the landlord for, and are extremely high traffic environments because of the fact that they're effectively subsidizing the cost of the transit to make it super fast, super efficient, super convenient, but then they're extracting rents from private businesses that are using those locations for their convenience and the fact that there's just high volume of customers. And they are very profitable enterprises, but not because they're running the trains, it's because of the fact that they own all this property, right? So this is just a different way of thinking about it. So in net, it's a very profitable business, just that running trains is not profitable. So,
yeah, I think that we have in some ways set up our transit systems to fail by not following that model. And I'm also not an expert in this, but it's my understanding, I'm totally wrong, that in Japan the high-speed rail system is not publicly subsidized or publicly owned, it's a private enterprise. And the way that it works is the government will do eminent domain in an area. So, that's problematic in the US, but they'll sort of do eminent domain, they'll take this very prime piece of real estate in the middle of Tokyo, and they basically give it to the high-speed rail company, who will then develop the hell out of it, with this giant skyscraper that has offices and retail and restaurants and a movie theater and whatever else. And that'll be a train stop, and they get to rent all the thing and lease it and turn it into sort of like, it's like if LA Live, if you gave them LA Live and said, in exchange, you now have to run Metro. Like, you're now in charge. Sorry, Stephanie, but like you're, sorry, Hillary, what am I saying? Have you on a panel yet? Oh my God, you've got like an amazing person here who needs to be on a panel. Come on up. So they'll run the whole system. But what we've done is we've done things that are really well intentioned, like say, your train system has to run into an affordable housing complex. Like you have to build affordable housing above your train station. And it's nice because we need housing, but who else is going to go there? Like if you have transit, you want to attract as many people to the destination as you can. So really, you should be running your transit into LA Live, and you should be running your transit directly into the Hollywood Bowl, and you should be running your transit into the Skirball Museum, or, I don't know if people go there. You should be running your transit like right into the heart of your tourist destination, not into an affordable housing building. Like maybe you have that somewhere in the development, but people are never going to go there as a destination. And it's also not people that are going to spend a ton of money on something that could be subsidizing the transit. Because the transit itself may not be profitable, but all of that tourist destination and all of those shops and restaurants could actually pay for your transit system. And that's the model they have in a lot of other countries. And I feel like if there's a way that we can refigure our transit system, we could actually have a transit system that's more sustainable and that has destinations that have a built-in audience to take to. And then not allow for any parking at all would be the next thing I would say.
The more I listen to this, I'm inspired to answer the original question that was posed, which is, why are people left behind and who are they? And I think it's the person that's stranded because they can't hail a cab because they've been run out of town. It's really the governance issue. I've traveled all over the world. I've done work in Singapore, UAE, and London, and those three areas have one thing in common, and that is they have a better governance than we have in the US. And California is a good example, so if you have the chance to do anything about it, we are broken because we have a moral bias in this country, and that's because when the highway system was built and public subsidies pay for mass transit and anything where the money flows from the federal government is favored. So for years, the ecosystem of transportation, which includes bikes, scooters, taxis, and Ubers, right, they've all been viewed as, oh, they're private, we don't have anything to do with them, so they're not our responsibility, but they are. And the problem is, whose responsibility is it? In California, is it the PUC? Is it the SFMTA? We saw this problem play out big time with the TNCs, right? Two sets of rules. In LA DOT, where I've done a lot of work for the agency, they have no control over where Uber goes and what they do because the state PUC does. We're seeing this play out in real time now with the automated vehicles because the companies want to pass state laws and have agencies like the PUC or somebody else at the state level control things. So I think we have a big problem. We have a governance problem. In Singapore, they have like a 25-year plan. That agency, the LTA, has control over every mode. Taxis, and they're responsible for it, like TfL does, and TfL's not perfect, and they have their issues, and but like Singapore and UAE and Dubai and Abu Dhabi, they do a great job because, well, first of all, they're not a democracy, so whatever they want to do, like China, you just, get out of your house in 48 hours because, you can't sue. But we have a lot of like lawsuits in America. We're very litigious. But the big problem is we will never be able to break down these fiefdoms because in New York City, there's like 10 agencies dealing with transportation. It's something that happens pretty much in every state in the United States. And try taking power away from one agency to another. It ain't easy. The only way we can solve that problem is have a czar, and they've kind of done it with Debs and Gabe at the federal government. That's a first good step. You have one agency in charge of coordinating everything on the funding side, but you actually need the governor of every state to appoint somebody who's in charge that has real authority to plan things so that you don't have these situations where the transportation is not going to the right place or you're showing up at another location where you shouldn't be. I really think that we need to marry city planning with somebody who's in charge. Otherwise, everybody has their fiefdom and they do their own thing. And California is a perfect example of that. Forget about the sprawl. Just think about how difficult it is to regulate private transportation in any way, shape, or form, and now the AVs. You got the cities fighting with the states right now. And so, when we should be delivering service, and the people that are left behind are the people that are waiting when we are having these battles and preferences between modes, and we can't get our act together because we don't have like a London's TfL in any part. The closest thing we have is SFMTA. And the PUC walks all over them every day.
You should have Hillary Norton come up and talk about this.
Hillary, come on up.
We're actually almost out of time. I know this went by really fast. make cities better, what would it be? Really quick.
I mean, in LA, just put some mass transit between the Valley and West LA, please. Thank you.
Have some neighborhood councils to introduce you to.
Yeah, I'll talk with them.
As
They probably don't like bus shelters either.
As a New Yorker, I'd love to see more opportunities around greatly reduced or free public transit.
Create a super agency in New York and put me in charge of it, and I'll change everything. But seriously, the governance problem. If I had to change one thing to solve everything else, governance. Get somebody in charge, have all the funding available and subsidies to treat everybody equally, because it's an ecosystem. It's all working together, and whether it's at the curb, in low-income neighborhoods, in rich neighborhoods, it all needs to work together, and we're not there. If we ever want mobility as a service, we have to fix our governance problem first.
Well, certainly changing the way that cities do their zoning and their planning to make cities function better for people. And one of the things that I've not been successful in over the years is changing what we're funding when it comes to transportation. We still tend to fund the wrong projects, and trying to change that so that we're more intentional about building the right kind of mobility system would be something. And absolutely trying to bring in more of the private sector and rethinking transportation to fit around profitability, as well as mobility, again, to de-silo those, because I think that we just don't have an integrated model.
This is certainly not the biggest challenge we're facing, but this is a personal pet peeve that I encountered recently, so take this with a grain of salt. I live in Orange County, and the city of Irvine banned electric bikes on public bike paths. And what? So just kind of like using my soapbox here, I go mountain biking on the weekends with a group of folks that are quite a bit older than me, but it were like evened out because they were riding e-bikes and I wasn't like huffing and puffing on a regular bike trying to keep up with them. And I just feel like that is an example of a very heavy-handed, like not a good use of time, public time, when you have people using e-bikes for recreational purposes, for fitness on the weekends, to go mountain biking in the beautiful nature that's been set aside, and then you just ban people for a ride. And it's like, I understand the argumentation about safety, but that's like saying like, you can't drive a BMW on the highway because you can go fast in it. It's like, yeah, you can go fast in a BMW, but you can also follow the speed limit. Or get ticketed.
People are mountain biking with e-bikes?
Electric electric bikes, mountain bikes are electrified too, yeah. But
Makes no sense.
makes no sense. So, okay, sorry, I don't want to take up all of this time here. You can enjoy, the natural environment and get on mountains and stuff to the top of the mountain, in an easier way. So you can be 65 years old and still go mountain biking, and it's a thing. It's a huge thing. Look it up. Yeah, exactly. It opens up natural environments for people to enjoy in like ways that are not, bad to the environment. Anyway, the point is that I think we could be spending our time on more interesting things than banning e-bikes. So
I did
my point is
legislation, by the way, to say that cities couldn't ban them in places that weren't trails because they all lost their cookies about trails, but my city, Glendale, banned e-bikes, like on the streets. Like it was crazy. So I did a bill that said they can't ban e-bikes anywhere except for like those kinds of trails because people were just so insane about it. But
I understand, yeah.
They think they're motorcycles. That's
Absolutely, yeah, I understand. I mean, I think it's always, as with anything, it's a nuance, right? Like, are people using them responsibly? If they're not, then they should be punished. If they are using them responsibly, they should not be punished.
Baby steps.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists. This is the last panel